The Galactic Tribunal had survived wars, alien invasions, deadly attacks, and disasters that almost wiped out entire civilizations. For thousands of years, it stood strong while countless empires rose and fell. Then one proud commander made a mistake no one could have imagined. He slapped a human. In that single moment, everything changed. What happened next shocked the entire galaxy and became a lesson taught in every military academy across known space. My name is Pix. I am a junior communications officer in the Quran fleet, and I witnessed the beginning of the greatest mistake in galactic history. Officially, my duties involved monitoring diplomatic channels and maintaining secure communications. In reality, I spent most days standing in polished corridors, pretending to look important, while ambassadors argued over shipping lanes, tariffs, and treaties that seemed capable of lasting longer than stars. 3 full cycles of mind-numbing diplomacy had convinced me that nothing surprising could ever happen inside the tribunal. I couldn't have been more wrong. Station Day 472 began like every other session. Quiet, painfully predictable, and overflowing with politicians convinced the fate of the galaxy depended on whose speech lasted the longest. By sunset, half the tribunal was in lockdown. Emergency alarms echoed through every sector, and one commander had learned that striking a human was not merely an insult. It was a catastrophic strategic error. Record the proceedings, keep my mandibles shut, and try not to fall asleep during another round of who gets mining rights to the Zephron asteroid belt. Spoiler alert, I failed spectacularly at the sleeping part. Well, almost. The conference hall was one of those unnecessarily grand spaces that the tribunal loved so much. Vaulted ceilings that stretched up forever. Bioluminescent panels casting this soft blue glow that was supposed to be calming, but just made everyone look slightly dead. And a massive circular table that could seat 50 delegates comfortably. Today we had maybe 20 species represented, which sounds like a lot until you realize that's actually a pretty small gathering for galactic standards. Commander Velik sat at the head of the table, naturally, because where else would he sit, right? The guy was 7 feet of scaled ego wrapped in decorative armor that probably cost more than my entire education. Theans are impressive to look at. I'll give us that crimson scales, twin crests that rise when we're agitated, and these piercing yellow eyes that can apparently intimidate most species in the known galaxy. Rolak had all of that, plus this air of superiority that made you want to punch him even when he was being nice. Which, for the record, was almost never. He'd been droning on for the better part of an hour about the Korean Empire's glorious military history, our conquests, our technological superiority, blah blah blah. The usual propaganda. Most of the delegates were doing that thing where they noted politely while clearly thinking about what they're having for dinner. The Zenturi representative was actually cleaning her claws, not even subtle about it. Then the door opened and Thomas Raines walked in. Now, I'd never seen a human in person before. Sure, I'd watched the briefings, seen the holo vids, read the reports about Earth being classified as a Class 12 death world, but reports don't really capture the reality of the thing. You know, Thomas Raines was tall for a human, maybe 6 feet, with this lean build that didn't look particularly threatening at first glance. Dark hair starting to gray at the temples, these sharp blue eyes that seemed to take in everything at once, and wearing a simple black suit that was probably worth less than VTO's left boot. He moved into the room with this quiet confidence that immediately changed the atmosphere. No fanfare, no dramatic entrance, just a human walking to his designated seat. But every delegate in that room turned to watch him. Even the Zinto stopped cleaning her claws. Oh, the human finally graces us with his presence, Velto announced, his voice dripping with sarcasm that could corrode hull plating. How generous of you to join us, Mr. Raines. I trust your primitive navigation systems didn't cause too much delay. Thomas smiled. Actually smiled. My apologies, Commander. I was reviewing the latest casualty reports from the Korath Terran border skirmishes. Took longer than expected. Lots of names to read. All that was smooth because everyone in that room knew the Korathian. Forces had been getting absolutely demolished in those skirmishes. 3 of our battle groups, just gone, reduced to debris and distress signals. And here was this human apologizing for being late because he was reading the names of our dead. The audacity was almost beautiful. Veltok's crests rose about 2 in danger sign. I made a note in my data pad. Commander agitated human delegate, possibly suicidal. Those skirmishes felt Talk said, his voice dropping to that low rumble that Korthians use right before they attack. Something were unfortunate misunderstandings. Clearly your species lacks the discipline to properly identify allied vessels in combat situation. Right. Thomas said, settling into his chair with infuriating casualness. Our fault entirely. I mean, sure, your ships opened fire first, entered Terran-protected space without authorization, and ignored 17 hails requesting identification. But yeah, definitely a human error. We should probably apologize again. The Zenny delegate made a chittering sound that I'm pretty sure was laughter. The Forian representative, this floating jellyfish-looking creature, pulsed a shade of amused orange. Even the normally stoic Draxian in the corner seemed to have his equivalent of a smirk. Aluk stood up, all 7 feet of wounded pride and scales. You dare mock the Korthian Empire? Your planet is barely out of its industrial age. You still use chemical propulsion for half your spacecraft. You've been in space for what, 200 of your years? We've been exploring the stars for millennia. Thomas leaned back in his chair, completely unbothered. That's true. We're pretty new to all this. Still learning the ropes, making mistakes, accidentally defending our territory with excessive force. You know how it is with primitive species. We get jumpy. I was frantically recording everything because this was either going to be the most entertaining diplomatic incident in tribunal history or the start of an actual war. Possibly both. Probably both. Jumpy Talk repeated, his voice now echoing through the chamber. Jumpy, is that what you call the unprovoked slaughter of Korthinian peacekeeper? I call it self-defense, Thomas said, and his smile finally disappeared. But if you want to discuss slaughter, Commander, we can absolutely talk about what your peacekeepers were doing to the colony on Terran 7 before our Jumpy fleet arrived. I've got footage, very detailed footage. Want me to share it with everyone here? The room went dead silent, like absolutely no sound except for the ambient hum of the station's life support, because apparently whatever happened on Terran 7 wasn't public knowledge yet, and Thomas Raines had just threatened to make it very public. Brill scales actually flushed darker, which in Korthians means pure rage. His crests were fully extended now, his claws flexing on the table's surface, leaving little scratch marks in the fancy imported wood. I'd seen him like this once before, right before he ordered a ship captain to be thrown in the brig for bringing him cold cloth juice. He walked around the table slowly, deliberately. Every step echoed. Thomas didn't move, didn't even turn his head to Track's approach. Just sat there relaxed like he was waiting for coffee to brew. You insects, Vac hissed. Now standing right behind Thomas's chair are a plague on this galaxy. Violent, irrational, barely evolved primates who stumbled into space travel and somehow convinced yourselves you belong among civilized species. Thomas tilted his head slightly. Primates actually not insects. Common mistake where carbon-based mammals from Earth, which as you mentioned is a death world. Bit of advice, Commander, you might want to remember that part. That's when Verto made the mistake. His hand came up fast and sharp, and he slapped Thomas Raines across the face. Not a gentle tap, either a full-force armored hand. I'm going to teach you respect kind of slap that echoed through the entire conference hall like a thunderclap. Kind of slap that would have sent most species sprawling to the floor, possibly unconscious. Definitely injured. Thomas's head snapped to the side from the impact. A thin line of blood appeared at the corner of his mouth, and then very slowly, very deliberately, he turned his head back to face forward. The entire room held its breath. 20 different species, all frozen, all watching. I had my recording device pointed straight at them, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped the thing. The Zenturi delegate had actually backed away from the table. The Forian had gone pale white, which I didn't even know was possible for their species. Thomas raised one hand, touched the blood at his lip, looked at it on his fingers. His expression was completely calm, eerily calm. But his eyes, oh, by all the stars in the void, his eyes had changed. There was something in them now that hadn't been there before. Something old and primal and absolutely terrifying. 5 seconds. I remember thinking that's how long we all stood there frozen, waiting to see what would happen next. 5 seconds. That felt like 5 hours. Commander Tuck, still standing behind Thomas, still with his hand raised, seemed to realize that maybe, just maybe, he'd made a critical error in judgment. 5 seconds. That's all it took for everything to change. Okay, so here's the thing about moments that change your entire understanding of the universe. They happen fast, like stupidly fast. Blink and you miss it fast. But somehow your brain records them in this weird slow motion detail that you can replay forever whether you want to or not. Trust me, I've replayed these 5 seconds about 10,000 times in my head, and it doesn't get less terrifying. Second one, Thomas's face changed. That's the only way I can describe it really. It wasn't like he got angry or scared or anything that simple. No, something deeper shifted. Something that had been sleeping under all that diplomatic politeness and forced smiles. His pupils dilated just a fraction, and his breathing changed, became slower, more controlled. The muscles in his jaw tightened, and I swear on my ancestral scales. The temperature in the room dropped 5 degrees. You know that feeling when you're a hatchling and you wander into a cave that turns out to be occupied by something that sees you as lunch? That primal, oh void, I made a horrible mistake feeling that hits you right in the survival instinct. Yeah, that's what every single being in that conference hall felt in second one, including I noticed Commander Velto himself. The human's hands, which had been resting casually on the armrests of his chair, went very still. Not tense, not clenched, just still, like a predator that stopped moving because it's decided you're prey, and there's no point wasting energy before the strike. His head tilted maybe half an inch, and he looked up at Veltok with an expression that was somehow completely blank and absolutely full of promise at the same time. Commander Thomas said, and his voice was different now, lower with this edge that made it sound less like talking and more like the moment before an explosion. That was unwise. Second to Verto's crests, which had been fully extended in his dominant display, suddenly flattened against his skull. I'd never seen him do that. Not once in 3 cycles of serving under him. Crest flattening is what Korthians do when we're genuinely afraid. When our biology overrides our ego and screams at us to run. His yellow eyes went wide, and I watched his throat work as he swallowed hard. I thought as perhaps I was too hasty. Talk stammered. Actually stammered, taking a step backward. His armored boots scraped against the floor with this pathetic scraping sound. The strike was merely a gesture of discipline standard in Korean military culture. Nothing personal. Certainly nothing that requires. But Thomas was already standing. I didn't see him get up. 1 second he was sitting in that chair. The next second he was on his feet facing Brel Tuck. And I have absolutely no memory of the transition between those two states. It was like watching edited footage with frames missing, except this was real life happening right in front of my face. The Zenturi delegate shrieked this high-pitched alarm call that her species makes when they sense imminent death. The Forian started pulsing emergency red, flooding the room with warning bioluminescence. The Draxian, who I'd thought was basically fearless, launched himself out of his chair so fast he knocked it over, scrambling for the exit. Security, someone shouted. Might have been me. Actually, security to Conference Hall 7 immediately. Code Violet. Repeat. Code Violet. Code Violet, by the way, means lethal force authorized. All delegates evacuate. Something very bad is happening right now. We'd never used Code Violet before. The tribunal had been operational for 60 standard years. And we'd never once needed Code Violet until today. Until a Korean commander slapped a human. Second 3. Thomas moved. And listen, I need you to understand something about Deathworld physiology versus standard galaxy biology. Okay, most species, we evolved on reasonable planets, normal gravity, reasonable atmospheric pressure, predators that kill you with venom or claws, or, you know, sensible things. We didn't need to develop crazy reflexes or extreme strength or any of that. We got smart instead, built tools, formed societies, very civilized humans. Humans evolved on a planet that was actively trying to kill them every single day. Gravity 1.3 times galactic standard. Atmospheres so rich in oxygen that their biochemistry runs like an overclocked fusion reactor. Predators that could rip them apart. Whether that could freeze or cook them. Diseases that should have wiped them out completely. And they didn't just survive, they thrived. They became apex predators on a planet full of apex predator. So when Thomas moved, he moved with speed and precision that my Korean eyes couldn't even properly track. His right hand came up in a blur. Fingers extended, aimed not at Velto's torso or arms, but directly at his throat. Combat training. Obvious combat training. The kind of movement you only learn through years of practice and actual battlefield experience. Veltok tried to react, tried to bring his own hands up in defense, but he was so slow compared to the human. It was like watching someone swim through thick gel while Thomas was cutting through vacuum. No resistance, no hesitation, just pure efficient violence. The human strike had about 15 in of travel distance, maybe less. Shouldn't have been enough force to do serious damage, right? Basic physics. But here's what I learned later from the medical examiner's report that I definitely wasn't supposed to read. Humans have this thing called fast twitch muscle fiber density that's about 3 times higher than Corthian standard. Their bones are reinforced with a mineral matrix that's stronger than most commercial ceramics. And when they're in danger, their endocrine system floods their body with these performance-enhancing chemicals that kill a normal species outright. Thomas's hand hit Velto's throat with approximately 900 pounds of force concentrated into an area about 2 inches square. The reinforced tracheal plates that Corthians are so proud of, the ones that are supposed to protect us from most physical attacks, might as well have been decorative paper. Second floor, the security doors burst open and 3 armed guards rushed in, weapons drawn, shouting orders that nobody was listening to. The Zenturi delegate had reached the emergency exit, was hammering on the override panel with all 4 of her manipulator limbs. Half the other delegates were huddled in the far corner of the room, making distressed noises in about 12 different languages. I was still frozen at my station, recording device clutched in my trembling hands, watching everything unfold with the detached horror of someone who knows they're witnessing something that will haunt them forever. My training said I should evacuate, should run, should do literally anything except stand there like an idiot. But I couldn't move, couldn't look away, couldn't do anything except watch. Thomas's strike had connected. His hand buried in Velto's throat up to the wrist, and the commander's eyes had gone from wide with fear to wider with shock to just empty. There was a wet crunching sound that my audio sensors picked up perfectly. Thank you very much, brain. I definitely wanted that memory preserved in crystal clarity. Blood, dark purple Corthian blood was spreading across Velto's decorative armor in a pattern that looked almost artistic. The human pulled his arm back smooth and controlled. No wasted motion. Velto's body started to fall backward, still standing like someone had suddenly turned off gravity, but only for him. His hands came up to his throat, instinctive, trying to stop what was already done. The security guards were halfway across the room now, weapons raised, targeting lasers painting red dots on Thomas's chest. Freeze. Do not move. Hands where we can see them. Thomas held his hands up immediately, palms out, fingers spread, compliant, completely calm, like he just finished signing a treaty instead of, the other thing. There was blood on his right hand, purple against his pale skin, dripping onto the expensive imported floor. Understood, Thomas said to the guards, his voice steady, professional, like he was confirming dinner reservations. I am not resisting. The situation is under control. Under control, stars above. The situation was under control. A human diplomat had just killed a Coronian commander in the middle of the Galactic Tribunal, and he was calmly informing security that everything was fine. Second 5, Velto's head came off. Just came off, separated from his body with this horrible tearing sound that I'm going to hear in my nightmares until the day I die. Turns out when you crush someone's trachea and sever their spinal column and rupture their carotid artery with a single strike, the structural integrity of the neck area is somewhat compromised. The weight of the head combined with Bretto's backward momentum combined with the station's artificial gravity just finished what Thomas had started. The head hit the floor first, rolled once, twice, came to rest, facing the conference table with those yellow eyes still wide open. Still shocked, the body followed a second later, collapsing in a heap of expensive armor and royal insignia, and all that Corin pride that apparently couldn't stop a Deathworld human from literally taking his head off. Then the chaos really started. The Zentui delegate finally got the emergency exit open and practically threw herself through it, screaming the whole way. The Thorium passed out, just dropped to the floor like a deflated balloon, their bioluminescence going dark. The Draxian was shouting into his commune about invoking emergency war protocols. 2 other delegates were being sick in the corner, which smelled absolutely delightful, let me tell you. The security guards had Thomas surrounded now, weapons pressed against his head, his chest, his back. He didn't resist, didn't fight, just stood there with his hands up, breathing slowly, while Commander Voltox's blood cooled around his feet. "I invoke diplomatic immunity under Terran law," Thomas said calmly, "and request immediate contact with the Earth Embassy. I am surrendering peacefully to tribunal authority and will cooperate fully with the investigation." One of the guards, a Jarthan female with her weapon shaking in her tentacles, managed to gasp out, "What investigation? You just murdered a commander." Thomas turned his head slightly to look at her, careful not to make any sudden movements. "Self-defense, he struck me first. It's on recording. Officer Pick has been documenting the entire proceedings." And that's when every eye in the room turned to me. Me, Junior Communications Officer Pick, still standing there like a statue, still clutching my recording device, still trying to process the fact that I just watched a human remove someone's head with his bare hands in less time than it takes to complete a hyperspace calculation. Yes, I have footage. I heard myself say my voice coming out all wrong, too. Hi, too shaky. Complete footage of the entire incident from multiple angles, timestamped, encrypted, everything. The head security officer, a Carathian named Drex, who I'd served with for 2 cycles, looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Fear mixed with disbelief, mixed with something that might have been respect. "PL, secure that footage immediately. Make 17 copies. Distribute them to Tribunal Command, Legal Division, and all embassy representatives. Do it now." I nodded, fumbled with the device, started the transfer protocols. My hands were still shaking so badly, I mistyped the encryption code 3 times before getting it right. Thomas was being led away in restraints. Now heavy-duty ones designed for high-threat individuals surrounded by a dozen guards who all kept their weapons trained on him like he might explode at any moment. He caught my eye as they passed, gave me the smallest nod like we were colleagues, acknowledging each other in a hallway. "Thank you for your diligence, Officer Pix," he said. "Accurate documentation is essential for justice." Then he was gone. The doors sealed behind him, and I was left alone in Conference Hall 7 with a headless body, a traumatized collection of delegates, and the growing realization that everything I thought I knew about the galaxy's power structure had just been violently revised. 5 seconds. That's all it took for a human to kill a Quran commander and change the course of interstellar politics forever. 5 seconds that I was going to spend the rest of my life trying to forget and knowing I never would. Station lockdown happened about 30 seconds after Thomas left the room. Glass doors slammed shut throughout the entire tribunal complex, sealing every section, every corridor, every docking bay. Red emergency lighting flooded the halls, and the automated announcement system started blaring in 17 languages about security protocols and mandatory confinement to quarters. Fun times, really. Nothing says intergalactic diplomacy like being trapped in a glorified space can while everyone panics. I got assigned to witness interview duty, which was just fantastic for my mental state. Let me tell you, because apparently recording the actual incident wasn't enough trauma for one day. No, I also got to spend the next 6 hours listening to 20 different beings describe what they'd seen. And here's the fun part. No 2 accounts matched. Not even close. The Zenturi delegate insisted Thomas had used some kind of concealed weapon, possibly a molecular blade hidden in his sleeve. Because no organic being could possibly move that fast or strike with that much force, she was absolutely certain, kept shittering about it, demanded a full body scan of the human to locate the hidden technology. The Forian, once they'd recovered from passing out, claimed Thomas had exhibited clear signs of combat stimulant use, said his pupils were dilated. His reaction time was chemically enhanced, and no natural biology could produce that level of performance without artificial augmentation. They wanted a full toxicology screen, biological sampling, the works. The Draxian, bless his paranoid little heart, was convinced the whole thing was a setup, said Valto must have been in on it, that this was some elaborate Terran plot to intimidate the Galactic Council into submission. He was demanding investigations into collusion, conspiracy, maybe even suggesting that Val was actually still alive somewhere, and this was all theater. Yeah, sure, buddy. The head on the floor was just really committed acting. My favorite was the Polonian trade minister who swore, absolutely swore that Thomas had moved so fast, he briefly phased out of normal spacing. Claimed there was a shimmer effect like reality itself had hiccuped. One of the station's temporal sensors reviewed for chronological anomalies. I documented everything, nodded politely, and tried not to scream because what I'd seen, what my recording device had captured in perfect detail, was much simpler and somehow much worse than any of their theories. Thomas Raines was just a human. No weapons, no drugs, no time manipulation, just biology, training, and 5 seconds of violence that our civilized galaxy wasn't prepared to comprehend. The real bombshell came when Earth Embassy finally sent over Thomas's personnel file. I was sitting in the investigative office, surrounded by senior tribunal officials when they opened the classified section. My mandibles actually dropped, which is embarrassing, but honestly understandable given the circumstances. Thomas Raines wasn't just a diplomat. Well, he was now, but that was basically retirement for him. Before joining the diplomatic corps, he'd spent 22 years in something called Terran Special Operations Command. The file had pictures of him, younger, harder, wearing military gear that looked designed for environments that would kill most species outright. Combat decorations from conflicts I'd never heard of on planets I couldn't pronounce. Training certifications, and hand-to-hand combat, insurgency tactics, hostage extraction, covert operations. One of the officials, a Jarthan legal advisor named Kelmouth, read through the file with increasing horror. He's killed before many times. This human has over 40 confirmed combat eliminations. Close quarters, personal. Why, by all the void's mercy, would Earth send someone like this to a diplomatic summit? Because I said, surprising myself by actually speaking up. They probably thought we'd be civilized enough not to physically assault their representative. Kilmoth looked at me like I just suggested the universe was actually flat, but Commander VTOK was asserting dominance. It's standard practice in Corthian culture. A simple disciplinary strike on a Deathworlder. I pointed out a trained Deathworlder soldier who spent 2 decades in combat zones. What did we think would happen? Turns out nobody had thought about it at all. That was the problem. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session 18 hours after the incident. Every major species had representatives there, either in person or via holoconference. The chamber was packed, standing room only, which I'd never seen before. Everyone wanted to watch the human explain himself. Wanted to see if he'd show remorse, fear, anything that would make sense in their cultural context. Thomas was brought in wearing diplomatic attire again. Perfectly pressed like the previous day's violence had been a minor inconvenience. The restraints were still on him, but he walked calmly between his guards, nodded respectfully to the council speaker, and took his position at the defendant's podium without being told. The Corthian delegation was present in force, all of them wearing mourning colors, all of them radiating barely contained fury. Valto's clutch brother, a general named Kraith, stood as the primary accuser. His crests were fully extended, his scales flushed dark with rage. This creature, Kraxith hissed, pointing one clawed finger at Thomas, murdered a decorated commander of the Korean Empire in cold blood. He tore my clutch brother's head from his body like a feral beast. There can be no excuse, no justification. We demand immediate execution. The chamber erupted in murmurs, some agreeing, some protesting. The council speaker, an ancient Valyrian whose species had been mediating disputes since before most of us achieved spaceflight, raised one manipulator for silence. The accused will now make his statement, she announced, her voice carrying that weird resonance that Valyrians use for official pronouncements. Thomas Raines of Earth, you stand accused of murder. How do you answer? Thomas stood quiet for a moment, looking around the chamber at all the assembled species, all the delegates who'd never met a human before yesterday. When he spoke, his voice was clear, measured, completely calm. I answer that I acted in self-defense, as is my right under both Terran law and Galactic Tribunal Charter Section 4, subsection 12, which protects all sentient beings from physical assault during diplomatic proceedings. He struck you once. Kraxith roared. 1. Disciplinary blow. You responded with lethal force. That is not proportional. That is not defense. That is murder. Thomas turned to face the Corthian directly. General, with respect. You're applying your cultural context to a species you don't understand. In Corthian society, a superior striking a subordinate is normal, expected even. But humans aren't Corthians. We evolved differently. Our biology works differently. Biology is not an excuse for savagery. No, Thomas agreed. But it is an explanation. Humans evolved as persistence predators on a high-gravity, high-oxygen world. Our threat response is hardwired into our nervous system at a level that bypasses conscious thought. When Commander Velto struck me, my body interpreted that as a lethal threat, not because I decided it was a threat. Because 200,000 years of evolution decided it was a threat. The council speaker leaned forward, interested. Explain this threat response. Thomas nodded. When a human perceives danger, our adrenal glands release a cascade of hormones. Adrenaline, new adrenaline, cortisol. Our heart rate increases. Our muscles receive increased blood flow and oxygen. Our pain threshold rises. Our reaction time decreases. Our strength output increases by approximately 40%. All of this happens automatically in milliseconds without conscious control. He paused, making eye contact with various delegates around the chamber. And here's the critical part. On Earth, if something is close enough to touch you, it's close enough to kill you. Our predators didn't announce their intentions. They didn't negotiate. They struck fast and without warning. So we adapted. We learned to respond to physical contact from perceived threats with immediate, overwhelming force because the alternative was death. You're saying you couldn't control yourself? Kelmuth asked from the legal section that you had no choice. I'm saying that by the time my conscious mind processed what was happening, my body had already responded. The strike that killed Commander Rito was executed by instinct, by training, by biological imperative. Could I have stopped it? Maybe. But that would have required overriding millions of years of evolution in a fraction of a second. The chamber went silent. You could have heard a scale drop, Thomas continued, his voice taking on a harder edge. And frankly, I shouldn't have had to stop it. Commander Velto assaulted me during a diplomatic summit. He violated every protocol we have for peaceful interaction. He put his hands on a representative of a species he knew nothing about from a planet he'd never bothered to study. And he paid the price for that ignorance. This is outrageous, Kraith shouted. You're justifying murder with biology. No, Thomas said quietly. I'm explaining cause and effect. Your brother made a choice. He chose violence. I responded to that violence in the only way my species knows how. This isn't murder, General. This is what happens when you slap a Deathworlder. The tribunal reviewed the footage next. All 17 angles of it frame by frame. Everyone watched Phil Talk's approach, his aggressive posture, his escalating threats. Everyone watched the slap, the sound echoing through the playback. Everyone watched Thomas's face change. Watch those 5 seconds unfold in horrifying detail. The medical examiner presented findings. The strike that killed Velto was executed with precision that indicated extensive training. The angle of impact, the force distribution, the target selection, all of it pointed to someone who knew exactly how to kill efficiently. But, and this was the important part, there was no hesitation, no wind-up, no preparation. It was purely reactive, exactly as Thomas had claimed. A xenobiologist from the Polonian Institute testified about death world adaptations, explaining how species from high-threat environments develop enhanced reflexes, increased muscle density, aggressive threat responses. She brought up examples from other known death worlds, showed comparisons, made it clear that humans weren't unique in this regard, just uniquely effective. The debate went on for hours. The Corinthian delegation demanded justice, called for execution, threatened to withdraw from the tribunal entirely. Other species argued for leniency, pointed out the legal protections, questioned why Verto had been allowed to make physical contact in the first place. Finally, after 6 hours of arguments and counterarguments and legal citations that made my head hurt, the council speaker called for a vote. The ruling came down narrow, but it came down self-defense. Thomas Raines was guilty of excessive force, but not murder. He was to be expelled from the tribunal, banned from diplomatic service, and remanded to Terran custody with a formal reprimand. But he wouldn't be executed, wouldn't even face imprisonment. Kraxith stormed out his entire delegation following the Corinthian Empire lodged a formal protest, recalled their ambassadors, and shut down 3 trade agreements. It caused a diplomatic incident that lasted months. But here's the thing that really mattered. The thing that changed everything. The council issued new protocols. Official guidelines for interaction with Deathworld species. Rule number 1, printed in bold text translated into every known language. Do not initiate physical contact with humans without explicit permission and clear understanding of consequences. They created a whole new classification species non-cont high threat response. Humans were the first on the list, but other Deathworld species got added quickly after. Formal training became mandatory for anyone working with Terran representatives. Cultural sensitivity courses, biology briefings, threat assessment protocols. I helped design some of those courses. Actually, turns out being the guy who recorded everything made me a valuable resource. I gave lectures, showed the footage with appropriate warnings, explained what I'd witnessed, watched the delegates from a 100 species learn the same lesson I'd learned the hard way. Never touch a Deathworlder. It's been 2 cycles since that day. Now 2 full cycles. And I still think about it constantly. Still Seek's head rolling across that floor. Still hear Thomas's calm voice explaining evolution and instinct like he was discussing weather patterns. The galaxy is different now. More careful. We ask permission before handshakes. We maintain distance during negotiations. We remember that not every species shares our assumptions about personal space and appropriate contact. Thomas Raines retired from public service entirely. Went back to Earth. Disappeared into whatever life former soldiers live when they're done with violence. I hope it's peaceful. I hope he found whatever passes for peace in a species that evolved from persistence predators. As for me, I got promoted junior communications officer to senior diplomatic historian. They figured someone should document these lessons properly, make sure future generations understand what happened and why. So that's what I do now. I teach young officers about cultural differences, about biological imperatives, about the day a Quran commander learned the hardest lesson in the galaxy. Some species think we've become too cautious, too afraid of humans and other Deathworlders. They complain about the protocols, the restrictions, the careful distance we maintain. They say we're being paranoid. I just show them the footage, all 5 seconds of it. Watch their faces change as they realize what they're seeing. Watch them understand that sometimes paranoia is just pattern recognition. 1 slap, 5 seconds, 1 death, and the entire galaxy learned to keep its hands to itself. The transport moved across the courtyard much too fast. It looked like it was going to hit me. Before the warning alarm could even finish ringing, someone grabbed my arm and pulled me out of the way. I almost fell, but I quickly found my balance. I turned around to see who had saved me. A young human stood there, breathing fast. He was still holding my sleeve, as if he didn't even realize what he had just done. A few seconds later, I learned his name. It was Ethan Cole. He was new at the academy. He had no idea who I really was. My hearts are pounding and not because of the transport that nearly ran me down. He just touched me skin to fabric, hand to arm, direct contact sustained for several seconds, and he is still standing, still breathing, still looking at me with nothing but concern. That should not be possible. My name is Alara Vance, and for 11 years I have carried a mark on my collarbone that every student, every teacher, and every visitor to this academy learns to fear on their very first day. It is a simple pale blue symbol, small enough to hide under a collar. But everyone here knows what it means. It means my body carries a passive neural signal that reacts violently with almost any advanced nervous system. It means that closeness to me for most living beings ends in seizure, collapse, and death within the hour. It is not a threat I choose to make. It is simply what I am. So when Ethan Cole let go of my arm, laughed a little at his own reflexes, and asked if I was all right, I did not answer right away. I was too busy waiting for him to fall. He did not fall. You grabbed me, I said when I finally found my voice. You should not have done that. You were about to get hit by a transport. He said like this was a completely reasonable answer. I am marked, I said, tapping my collarbone. Do you understand what this means? He glanced at the mark, tilted his head, and shrugged. I read the orientation packet. Something about a resonance hazard. Didn't really get the memo on staying away from people, if that's what you're asking. I studied him carefully, searching his face for any early sign of what should already be happening to him. A flush of blood to the skin, a tremor in the hand, a flicker behind the eyes that signals the brain beginning to misfire. There was nothing, only mild curiosity. I told him to leave before something changed. He did not leave. He walked me the rest of the way to the science hall, chatting the whole time about how strange the transport lanes were designed, as if he had not just broken a rule that every other student on this campus has followed without question for years. That night, I ran 3 separate scans on the sleeve of my uniform, searching for any biological trace that might explain what had happened. I found nothing unusual, no resonance transfer, no sign that contact had occurred at all, aside from a faint smear of dust from his hand. It made no sense, and it kept me awake far longer than I wanted to admit. The next morning, he sat down across from me at breakfast. The hall went quiet in the way it always does when someone approaches my table. Except this time, the quiet had a different shape to it. It was not relief that someone had finally learned better. It was surprise because nobody sits at my table twice. "You are back," I said. Figured the seat by the window was still open. He set his tray down like this was any ordinary decision. Nobody else seems to want it. There is a reason for that. Yeah, I heard some kind of neural thing. Contact with you is supposed to be dangerous. He picked up his fork. I touched your arm yesterday, and I feel completely fine. That does not mean it is safe. It might simply mean the effect has not caught up with you yet. He did not seem worried by this. If anything, he seemed intrigued. The way a person looks at a puzzle they have decided to solve out of stubbornness rather than necessity. Over the following weeks, I ran every test I could think of. Blood samples given with his permission, and a surprising lack of hesitation, neural scans in the biology lab late at night, when no one else would ask questions about why a marked student was scanning a human's brain activity. Every result came back the same. Nothing. My professor, a sharp-eyed woman named Miriam Doyle, finally sat me down after the fourth failed test and explained something I had never considered before. Human neural patterns are unlike almost anything else we have studied, she said, adjusting the display on her desk. There. Baseline brain activity is already chaotic. Constant competing impulses, emotional signals running against logical ones, contradictions held at the same time without collapse. Most species would call that a malfunction. For humans, it appears to be normal operation. That sounds dangerous, I said. It should be, she agreed. But perhaps that is exactly why your resonance does not affect him the way it affects everyone else. Your ability works by pushing a nervous system into a runaway loop it cannot survive. If a human brain already exists inside something close to a controlled version of that same loop every single day from birth, then perhaps there is nothing left for your resonance to break. You cannot shatter a structure that has already learned to hold itself together while cracked. I did not fully accept this explanation until 3 weeks later during an evening study session in the West Library, when Ethan reached across the table to study a stack of falling data tablets, and his hand brushed mine. I froze completely. He barely noticed. "You okay?" he asked, already moving on to the next tablet. I was not okay. I had just experienced full, unguarded physical contact for the first time in 11 years without instinctively preparing to watch someone collapse in front of me. "I am fine," I said, though my voice did not sound fine at all. Word travels quickly at an academy full of bored, brilliant students with nothing better to gossip about. Within a month, everyone knew that the marked girl had a human sitting at her table and that the human appeared to be against every known precedent, completely unaffected. The reaction was not what I expected. I thought there might be relief or curiosity or perhaps quiet celebration that the danger surrounding me was somehow smaller than everyone believed. Instead, there was concern. Not concern for me. Concern that the academy's safety protocols were being questioned by a first-year student who apparently did not take warning seriously. I was called into the administrator's office on a gray afternoon, exactly 6 weeks after the day Ethan first sat at my table. The administrator, a stern man named Gerald Finch, did not offer me a seat. "You understand the purpose of the isolation protocols," he said. It was not a question. "I do. And yet you have allowed repeated physical contact with another student in direct violation of academy safety policy." "I did not allow it. I said he initiated it. I have run every test available to me. There is no measurable resonance transfer. He is, as far as I can determine, simply immune. There is no such thing as immunity to a Class 3 hazard," Finch said. "There is only luck that has not yet run out." His words settled into my chest like a stone. I had thought the same thing myself more than once in the quiet hours after Ethan left the library. What if Doyle's theory was wrong? What if the resonance was simply slower in him, building towards some delayed and far worse collapse? What if I was the reason a bright, stubborn young man would eventually stop breathing and I would be the only one standing close enough to watch it happen? "I want the two of you separated," Finch said immediately. "He will be reassigned to a different residence wing, a different study schedule, and a different meal period. This is not a punishment. It is a precaution that should have been in place from the beginning." I did not argue. I could not. Not while the fear he had planted was already spreading through me faster than any resonance ever could. I told Ethan that evening in the corridor outside the science hall that he needed to stay away from me from now on. Why? He said, and for the first time since I had known him, there was no easy humor in his voice. Because Finch is right, I said. There is no proof that you are safe. There is only proof that nothing has happened yet. I cannot be the reason you stop existing. You didn't seem worried about that a month ago. I was foolish a month ago. He studied me for a long moment. The way he had studied the falling data tablets before catching them. Like he was calculating exactly how much effort it would take to fix something before it broke. Doyle told me about her theory. He said, the chaos thing, the idea that our brains already run on contradictions. It is only a theory. Maybe, but I've had 4 scans done on me since I met you, and every single one came back clean. That's not luck running out slowly. That's a pattern. He took a step closer. Close enough that the old instinct in me screamed to step back, and I did not move. I'm not asking you to prove I'm safe. I'm asking you to stop deciding for me what risks I'm allowed to take. I had no answer for that. Nobody had ever spoken to me as though my danger was something to be weighed and chosen rather than something to be feared and avoided entirely. 3 days later, the situation became far more serious than either of us expected. A first-year student named Priya Malhotra, unfamiliar with the campus layout, wandered into the West Library during a private testing session Doyle had arranged to study my resonance field under controlled conditions. Priya was not marked as a hazard. She was simply a curious student who did not realize the room was in use, and she stepped directly into the containment field before anyone could stop her. I felt the resonance connect the instant she crossed the threshold. It is not something I can describe easily to anyone who has not experienced it. But imagine a sound only you can hear, growing louder the moment another mind enters range. And knowing that sound is the beginning of a countdown. Priya went pale almost immediately. Her hand shot out to the nearest table for balance, and her breathing turned shallow and fast. Doyle was already moving toward the emergency shutdown panel across the room, too far to reach it in time. I could see the calculation in her eyes, the same one I had run in my own head 1,000 times. How many seconds until collapse? How many seconds until the panel and the terrible gap between those two numbers? Ethan was closer to me than either of them, standing near the doorway where he had been waiting to walk me home. Get her out of the field, he said, already moving toward Priya. You will make it worse, I said. 2 additional bodies close to me increases the resonance load. Then narrow it, he said. Doyle said the field responds to attention, not just proximity. You said it yourself weeks ago when you were running scans on me. You said it feels stronger when you are afraid and weaker when you are calm. He was right, and I had almost forgotten it in the panic of the moment. My resonance is not a fixed broadcast. It amplifies with my own emotional intensity, spreading wider and striking harder the more frightened or overwhelmed I become. I had spent 11 years assuming the only safe response to danger was distance. I had never once tried the opposite. I closed my eyes, forced my breathing to slow, and reached for the same stillness I used during meditation exercises in the evenings. The exercises Doyle always encouraged, and I always dismissed as unnecessary. I pictured the field not as an uncontrollable storm, but as something with edges, something that could be pulled inward rather than allowed to spread. Priya's breathing was growing worse. Doyle reached the panel and slammed her hand against it. But the shutdown sequence would take another 20 seconds to fully engage. And 20 seconds is far more than enough time for a resonance cascade to finish its work. Ethan crossed the last few steps between himself and Priya and put both hands on her shoulders, steady and firm, the same way he had steadied me on the day we met. Look at me, he said to her. Breathe with me in and out. Slow. It should have made everything worse. Another mind entering close range should have doubled the load on an already failing system. Instead, something strange happened. Priya's panic, which had been feeding the resonance and pushing it toward collapse, found something steadier to match itself against. Ethan's calm, chaotic, contradiction-holding human mind did not add fuel to the cascade. It gave Priya's frightened mind something stable to imitate, the way a person struggling in water will calm down faster near someone who is not afraid of drowning. Her breathing slowed. The tremor in her hand eased. Color returned to her face just as the containment shutdown finally engaged with a soft mechanical hum. sealing the field before it could ever reach its peak. Nobody in that room spoke for several long seconds. Doyle was the first to move, checking Priya's pulse, her breathing, the response of her eyes, confirming again and again that the girl in front of her was against every precedent in the Academy's history completely unharmed. That should not have worked, Doyle said quietly, more to herself than to any of us. Maybe it worked because we stopped assuming it couldn't, Ethan said. Finch arrived minutes later, alerted by the shutdown alarm, expecting to find a tragedy and finding instead 3 shaken students and a very confused professor. He listened to Doyle's report in silence, his expression unreadable, and when he finally spoke, his voice had lost some of its earlier certainty. This changes nothing about the protocols, he said. Not officially, not yet. But, Doyle asked. But I will be requesting a full review, he said. And until that review is complete, I am not going to stand here and separate 2 students whose combined presence just kept a 3rd student alive. He left without another word, and I found myself standing in the middle of a room that had nearly become a tragedy, next to a girl who was still trembling with relief and a young man who was looking at me, not with fear, not with pity, but with the same steady curiosity he had shown me on the very first day we met. You did that, he said. Not me. I just gave you something to hold on to. I do not think I could have done it alone. Maybe that's the point, he said. Maybe nobody is supposed to hold a storm back by themselves. In the weeks that followed, the Academy did not suddenly abandon its caution around me. The mark on my collarbone still means exactly what it has always meant to nearly every living being who crosses my path. And I do not expect that danger to disappear simply because one remarkable exception exists. But the exception is real, and it is no longer alone at a table by the window. Priya joined us for meals twice a week after that. Always at a careful distance at first, then closer as trust grew between us the way trust is supposed to grow slowly and honestly instead of being forced by fear or forbidden by policy. Doyle continues her research into human neural patterns, though she now openly admits her early theories only explain part of what she witnessed that day in the library. The rest, she says, may simply be something science has not yet found the right words for. As for me, I still carry the mark and I still walk carefully through a world built to avoid me. But I no longer walk it thinking that distance is the only answer to what I am. Some walls, it turns out, were never meant to stand forever. They were only waiting for someone stubborn enough to walk straight.